All right, welcome everybody. I'm April Wolford. I'm the Zoom host here for the breakout session. So I'll be handling the technical aspects of the meeting. Note that your microphones will be muted through the first part of the discussion and the presentation, but when it comes to the question and answer period, we'll let you have control of your microphone and you can ask the questions. I'm going to turn it over to our host, Susan Jennings, who's the Executive Director of Community Solutions.
Great, thank you, April. I'm really thrilled to have everyone here this afternoon. It's been a great morning, and I'm thrilled to introduce Julia, Cady, and Branson Pyles, who are going to talk a little bit about their farm, Howell Farm. Julia is the 4th generation, and Branson the 5th generation to farm here in Clark County, Ohio, and it's a really great story, and it kind of follows on Kevin's presentation earlier today when he talked about trying to get his family organized to develop a plan. The Howell family was able to develop a plan to keep the land in farming and in family, and we're really looking forward to hearing their story today. So I think, Branson, you're going to start off this afternoon?
I am. Thank you, Susan. Thanks, April. Just going to give a brief history of the Howell farms and a couple of the generations. Then we'll get to the decisions, then to the tools that we used, and then our current experiences that are happening now. Our family moved to Ohio in 1834 and into Clark County, Ohio, and part of Greene County. And after settling in some parts, our great-great-grandfather, John, purchased our current farm in 1848. And he was a farmer and a banker, and his son really got into farming and loved it. And so with then next thing you know, it was Ralph Howell and Sons. And so we have 1, 2, 3, Mom is 5th generation. My brothers and cousins and I are Mom's the 4th generation on this farm, Howell Farms. It's located about 2 miles north of Young's Jersey Dairy, a local landmark. And what we found was that they liked our land because at the time it had lots of water for livestock and for balance. And so the farm was really very productive. And the 2 brothers, my grandfather and his brother, really expanded the farm and built it into quite the powerhouse. They went through the Depression and made it through, added some land, and upon coming into the 60s, it was just, they had a total of 1,300 acres between the 2 brothers, and were both very diligent and known in the area as very good farmers. And they worked well together and worked well with others. They were both interested and took a lot of tours to expand and learn about farming. Well, we fast forward, and grandfather passed away in 1972. And with a brief interim with grandmother managing, Mom took over management of the Howell farm, and she and her brother David and her sister Janet, both of whom, brother and sister, were out of state, all managed the farm from 1983, 82 through up until she's still managing it. I have a little trainee button. I'm still learning. And she still has a good pulse on farming and what it takes out there. But however, there was a monumental change after grandfather passed away, because then we became not farmers, but managers and owners of land leasing the land and working with other farm producers. And that is a big change with, versus owner operated. The last I checked, leased land in Ohio was above 60%, meaning that owner operators are rare. There's still a lot of landowners that are holding on to their land and trying to figure out how to keep the farm in the family. Well, Mom and David and Janet all started thinking about, well, what's going to happen with the next generation? All their children were far flung. We were a mobile generation and we were all scattered about. And they were trying to come up with a way or an idea of what to do for the next generation. Do they sell it? Do they continue to manage? Do they, the questions. And so there was during that process, a local land trust developed in 1990 and formed right here in this area, which gave a tool to, possibly place the land, to hold it into one, to keep it in the family. That didn't matter, but the land trust keeps it in as one farm. So David and Janet and Mom had a big decision to make, and Mom would send lots of educational information, and they would discuss it. And at the end of the year, they decided to go ahead with an easement on the Howell family farm. But that was only one part of it. Right. This was an agricultural conservation easement with the Tecumseh Land Trust. And we were the first large farm to donate the easement. The second part of this tool, of the tools, were to find out how to, for the next generation, because it's hard to look forward and you look at kids when they're teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, they're different mindsets as they develop. And Mom and Aunt Jan and Uncle David had their hands full looking at this next generation as we were all out there. Well, what's going to happen? About this time, I was coming back to the area and helping out. And so what happened was that they came up with the plan to put the farm in a family limited partnership instead of having 3 just individual sole partners. And by doing that, in that family limited partnership, there's a corporation tucked in there, so that each individual that becomes part of the tree down the road, they receive shares. And if anybody wants to diverse or disband or sell, then they have to sell the shares back into the family limited partnership. And that way we have had wonderful, we've had nobody that really wanted out. And I think that everybody that is in now, all our partners are in Texas, California, Illinois, Minnesota, and here in Ohio.
California.
Yeah, California. And they come back once a year. And they have visits with their Aunt Julie, and they get to be in touch with the farm and this area. And we have an annual meeting that could be considered a situation comedy, where we all Zoom and get together and We have everybody asking questions. Mom and I keep them apprised of what's going on with the farm. We do a budget. We do stories on what worked and what hasn't worked, because we also have to work with our current farm producer, because we're not the active farmers. And so by keeping our families, the far-flung families, in touch when they come here and through our meetings, I think that they are also, they enjoy that very much with the Mom's writing something. I've got to take a note here. Okay, Mom wanted to remind me that the partners, Uncle David had 3 children and Aunt Jan had 4 children. So we have 7 current partners in the farm along with Mom, and that all the decision making is done in that way. And the land trust comes out once a year and monitors the property, and our partners come back when they can in the summer, some in the fall, and we all just currently right now we have no family that everybody's very comfortable. But now our generation is faced with looking down the road. My son, my brother's sons, the children of our cousins and current partners. What are we going to do? But we have the tools that are set up, and we'll be having a meeting with them because most of them are in their 20s and 30s now, and we're going to start to bring them into the fold. Well,
I think we the important thing is the easement is on, and the second important thing is the land is undivided. I think that's a key element, to have your land undivided. Otherwise, if you start taking it apart, it doesn't work as well. So that's an important element. And we almost had a consensus. My brother and sister and I always tried to have consensus, and we didn't quite have it. 2 of us decided on the easement, and we didn't really bring the other person along because that person talked to their children and they wondered if it was a good idea. But we went ahead with the easement, and when everyone came, when those 4 children returned to the farm and learned the history after their parents' death, they were so grateful and so happy that the farm was protected because of its history, which they hadn't known before. And I think Branson and I try to talk about the history more now. Mm-hmm. And there will be 11 partners at one point, right? There will be 11 partners, and that's a lot of partners. But there will be 3 votes. And that's an important thing when you're dealing with, you have siblings talking to siblings versus cousins. Indirectly, you're all cousins and talking also, but decision-making can happen within each family.
I'm If you don't mind me breaking in, I think it's really interesting that if even if one generation doesn't necessarily see the importance of the farm, that the next generation might see it quite differently. So I think that's super interesting, and somewhat like Kevin's story, where Kevin felt, or Dr. Magruder, excuse me, felt really compelled to keep the farm together, but his parents weren't necessarily, or his parents' generation weren't necessarily as interested. So I think you're right, Julie. I appreciate the easement. Basically, you're saying that the best thing to do is have two different pieces. One, the agricultural easement that keeps the farm together, and then the second, the family agreement. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what that looks like, the corporation, and how you decided to set it up that way. Julia, were you part of that?
I was, well, mainly because my brother and sister and I only had a partnership where if one of us died, then that partnership is gone. So you need a structure that will stay in place. So the family limited partnership, I believe, helped, well, it's structured so it does stay in place. And even during a death. And shares are distributed as opposed to acres. And that's an important segment. Did you have other questions?
We have a question here, if that's all right, Branson. We did not talk about this, or you haven't talked about it yet. The question is, does anybody actually any of the family currently actively farm?
No, we do the maintenance on the farm, and we do the upkeep on the buildings, and we do the land maintenance. We stay in good touch that way. I know of a farm down the road where not one partner lives in the state, and they have an easement, and they've got a corporation, and they've basically done the same thing, except I feel that having somebody nearby, mom's always been on the farm. I've moved back to the area. It does help to have, they say, good fertilizer for the land are the soles of your feet.
Oh, beautiful. Hey, Branson, there's a follow-up question. What would happen if somebody from the next generation wanted to farm? How would that be dealt with?
We would rejoice. and
the likelihood is
you never know.
Right.
You never know, because people change throughout and develop, and they would be able to attempt to farm if they showed willingness to want to do it.
Great. I noticed that Kevin's willing to tell us a little bit more about his family farm, if you don't mind, Julie and Branson. Kevin?
No, we're all in this together.
Great.
Branson has heard a little bit of this already, because I teach a class called Ohio Stories. In the last few years, I've done Ohio Stories Farm Edition, which looks at the U.S. history through the lens of Ohio farm. His farm has been a field trip stop for my students, but it really got me thinking about my family's history. This morning, when I spoke about the farm that my family has, it was purchased by my great-grandfather in 1891 in Alabama. And he had 6 sons and 2 daughters. They all grew up on the farm. And as they came to adulthood, the farm was not divided. They all had homes and had areas that they farmed. It is interesting to contrast with what Branson and Julia have described, in that the complicating issues, there's several. During the Depression, some of the brothers left, and they really struggled to keep that farm during the Depression. And there were a lot of hard feelings around that. Eventually there were, among those siblings, there were 25 children. And so by the time I made my presentation in the 1980s, in 1988, I mentioned that I presented a proposal to form a family corporation. I have an MBA in real estate finance from Columbia. And so, I'm interested in that, and I felt I could use that skill. And I mentioned that they listened intently and tabled it. And I later learned that the level of complication, and it is related to that Depression era, that was 50 years later, but my grandmother and most of the men were dead by then, but their widows who had worked through the Depression when others left resented those branches of the family that left. And they never told me this, but I realize now that was one of the reasons why they weren't comfortable with moving forward. And the reason I had suggested a corporation, because the attorney I met with said that if without something, they were selling timber every few years. The person said that without that, somebody could challenge a sale and the whole thing is on hold. And that's exactly what happened about 15 years later, is that one of the cousins challenged that, and it ended up being in court. They had a process that's called to quiet title to figure out what the ownership was. Mm-hmm. And that went on for about 10 years. And the conclusion was that even though the brothers left, they weren't bought out. There was no formal way that they could not be included.
Right.
And because of all of those hard feelings and the fact that these people now were in their 70s, 80s, and some in their 90s, they couldn't reach a resolution. And so that's really how the sale ended up happening. And my cousin Marie, who's one of the people who bought the farm, I was just thinking this morning, her father was the person who kind of started that ball rolling, and I used to resent it, but at that point, there was so much bitterness that it just could not be resolved. And that's really why I'm so interested in having that conversation, like Branson was mentioning early, so that there's not that bitterness, because there were 25 cousins of that generation and they grew up together. There are 100 cousins of my generation. And so if they had left it to us and we don't know each other as well, it really needed to be resolved in that generation. And, they ran out of time to do it. And, so it's kind of a cautionary tale with some silver linings, in that some family members did buy. I considered buying with a couple cousins, but I'm in Ohio, and it just didn't make sense for me to do that at age 63. So I passed on it. And Marie, who bought the land, I had a survey done on, it was 50 acres, and she used that survey and then ended up buying the land. She's about 15 years younger than me, so I'm really support what she's going to be doing.
Thanks for that great story, which again, Kevin, is a cautionary tale, I guess, although I know we all have families, so we all know how families sometimes work. But I think it does sort of highlight the importance of these tools, and like thinking about things like how farms as case studies that really ought to be widely talked about, so people know the opportunities that are there. And I don't know, is there a standardization of things like what you, Julia, what you and the family have done? Are there standard legal practices now turning doing farm succession in the way that you figured out how to do it?
Well, I can't answer that directly, but when Branson and I spoke, we've spoken to a Clark County group and another group, and there was much interest in the Clark County group. I think for two reasons. when we donated the easement, that was our only choice. But now there are dollars that a land trust can use to buy easements, which is important. That wasn't there in our time. The second thing that's important is at that Clark County meeting, people wanted to see that structure. So I went home and took some pieces from what we had set up, which an attorney had set up with me to put in place. And because I had experience with family, I think, was why I wanted to keep that family structure in 3 families, just because I felt it was practical.
Susan,
Yes.
there's not standards. There is not a standard book plate, you know, that you just template that just passes on down. And there are attorneys that will set things up, but we went to see a couple different attorneys, and you have to really implore upon them what you like and what your vision is for the future generations, because you know they will just kind of put something together. The next thing you know, if there's a little glitch somewhere and somebody down the road, because like Kevin's story, there are hundreds, thousands of those stories all throughout Ohio. I know 3 brothers that had ag land, and one brother wanted out, and they had to sell the farm. 2 brothers had to go out of the business because the one wanted to sell, not to sell to the farm, but to sell for development or to sell for the maximum price at the time, you know.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm noticing in the chat session, and thank you, Shonda. Shonda, in the chat, if folks can see that Nationwide, who's one of our sponsors, does have a succession planning service, and it is free, called Land is Your Legacy. And Shonda, oh, she did put in the in a link in the chat. And then Krista also noted that OFA is working hard to make succession more accessible, or the tools. And I know they do, they also do workshops that TLT has co-sponsored. I do, we still have 10 minutes or so. Maybe people could put some questions that they want to make sure are answered. I did want to give Krista just a moment to talk a little bit about conservation easements, because I do think that they are a tool that can be really helpful, just because there's, again, as Julia mentioned, there's sort of 2 pieces. One is making sure that land stays in agriculture, which we all, I hope, agree is a really important thing, maybe not especially now, but certainly now. And I just, again, thinking about the time that we're in and the fact that people are moving out of cities and looking to move to the country. And I think we're going to have a big spate of rural development. So thinking about how do we preserve the farmland that we have. Krista, maybe just a few things on conservation easements. Give us your best pitch. Oh, sorry, let me unmute you. Or April, can you unmute everyone? There we go.
I think I'm unmuted. Yay.
Okay,
all right.
Great.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I work for the Tecumseh Land Trust, and the Howe Farm is sort of an exception. You know, honestly, there's not many examples of a multi-generational family that has done that kind of succession planning. We encourage people to do it, though, because with the conservation easement, we have an obligation. That's our role as a nonprofit organization, to make sure that farmland and natural lands, which we also try to preserve, stay available for those farming or conservation purposes, no matter who owns them over time. So if somebody dies and a family doesn't have any kind of plans in place, there can be all sorts of strife. And there we are, saying, well, it's gotta stay farmland and it's gotta stay intact. So we really want people to do that kind of planning. I would say though also, you know, one of the reasons I've been really attentive about this conference is that, you know, I think there's some opportunities for new farmers, Black farmers or Black investors to buy farmland as time goes on. Because there's certainly some people that have conservation easements on their land who don't have kids that are interested in owning that land, but they went to the trouble, or have no kids in some cases. I visited a farm like that this week, and this land's going to come available. The price will be lower in a lot of instances because it's got the conservation easement on it. And so I'm excited about Central State starting to do more outreach to new Black farmers. You know, my hope is that as we see more of this turnover from the original landowner who put the easement in place to whoever the next successor is going to be, that we're able to be able to really make that affirmatively accessible, because it you know, land is just so much of wealth. So the conservation easement is a great start. As Julie and Branson said, there's funding available now for current owners. So the value that they give up, they can basically get compensated for, get a tax break for. So it's one tool, you know, that's real important. But it's not enough by itself.
Yes, thank you, Krista. Casey Hoy from Ohio State, thanks for joining us, Casey. He asked a great question. I'm not sure if any of us here can answer it. Well, Julie and Branson can answer how it relates to Hall Farm. He asked, do you stipulate in the terms of your plan how the land will be managed as agricultural land, i.e. conservation practices, organic, etc.? And then also, would you consider using this process as an opportunity to open land access preferentially to Black or Hispanic or Indigenous farmers? And I think that's kind of a continuation. And again, thanks for the great question, Casey, of this conversation about land access as maybe a reparations tool, or to really just think about how do we move forward as a country, not just as a state or a region, but as a country, to try to redress things that have happened in our past, as we've learned, especially over these last couple days. So I don't know, Kevin, Julia, Branson, any of you want to tackle that really interesting question?
Multi-layered question.
It is indeed.
Yeah, we are open to all sorts of organic down the road to anybody, you know, that the land. One of the things we plan on doing is bringing that next generation and start to have them participate in at least one meeting per year, and show them and show them because we have very good prime tillable. It's no-till, but it's very good prime farmland, and I think that it can be used for all sorts. As far as, we can't sell sections though, so it would have to be the entire farm as far as selling. But we could allow, just like we do now to a farm producer, we can allow, you know, somebody down the road, the next generation can all come together, and they might have a total different mindset on how it is farmed. And
yes, thank you very much, Branson. Kevin, would you like to tackle the land access as and reparations? We haven't really talked about that at all, but I know that's obviously of interest to you. Is there much conversation going on? I know Schumacher Center, which is a partner of ours in Western Mass, published a really interesting white paper a couple months ago on the Black Commons and the idea of using the community land trust model as a way to make land long-term accessible to farmers, particularly Black and other underserved farmers. Is that something that you've looked at very much?
I haven't, but Emily Seibel of Yellow Springs Home Inc., which they're part of a community land trust that's housing based, is really begun talking about a corollary for farming. And so for a younger generation, I could see the appeal of that you're not going into it alone. It's a trust, so there's a collective way to learn. I also wonder, kind of thinking through what my aunt, who was really managing the sale process, aunt and cousins, they were both managing the sale process over the last 3 years or so. I suspect if there was something like Tecumseh Land Trust, that might
Kevin, you're breaking up a little bit.
happen.
Is that, are other people having, oh, there you go, Kevin. We
They-
lost you after, if you suspect if there had been a Tecumseh Land Trust in your region.
That might have been appealing to them to provide some money for an easement. They wanted an exit plan, and they wanted some cash, but they didn't necessarily want to sell the farm, but
Yeah.
that was the only way to do that. And so, you know, many of them got that, and the family members who were able to buy got that too. But I would say they probably sold about 70% of the 300 acres. And I think most of them would have preferred something different that would have allowed, and I don't know in that area if there's something like that. I did a little bit of research when I was thinking about buying, and I talked with the extension agent in that area, and he really said the best approach if I were to buy it was to lease it. And you know, and that kind of ties in with what Branson was saying, is about 60% of farmland in Ohio is being leased, and I think that's similar probably in that part of Alabama.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Julie and we don't have a lot of time left. Are there things that you wished that you had said and haven't had a chance to say yet?
No, thank you. But well, I have a funny story. When my brother and sister and I were there, of course, I knew about easements because I was working with Tecumseh Land Trust. And I always kept Stephen Small's book out on my table because my brother and sister would come visit once or twice a year. And I always had the Stephen Small book out on the table, but I also don't like to push people. And the reason the easement got on really was my brother read it one time.
The Stephen Small
The
book.
Stephen Small book, thank you, Branson. And he said, Julia, I think we ought to do this.
And the Stephen Small book is he was a corporate attorney, or
He's a
tax
person and told us, well, and of course it's been edited since then. There are 2 or 3 newer books out, but he talked about the value of deducting an easement. So that, you know, that was.
So the power of stories, the power of sharing stories. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. April, did you want to unmute folks to see if there's anybody who had something else they wanted to say to Kevin, Julie, or Branson?
Everyone has control of their.
I see. Okay, so, and we don't have to rush off. We're at 2:45. At 3, we're doing in this Zoom room, we're doing the farming during a pandemic. I'm not in a huge rush to cede to that. So if folks have questions, if Julie and Branson and Kevin are willing to stick around. I noticed that Krista put another resource in the chat, that there's a Black family land trust in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina that's trying to help people hold farms together. I think too, I was I was really moved by Terry from the Southern Cooperatives conversation. I think that also, you know, thinking about the land trust model and then the cooperative farming does really offer a lot of opportunities for people, because farming for anybody is obviously not an easy, it's not an easy profession, it's not an easy business. So the more I think people are working together and feeling like they're not on it in it on their own, I think the more likely they are and we are to succeed. Kevin, is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, thank you.
It's your moment of glory. No, seriously, we're all listening.
I want to just say that we have actually the second session is in a different meeting.
Oh, it is in a different meeting.
There is
Okay.
a link for us.
Okay. So we should be, does that mean we should be heading out, April?
Yes, soon we should wrap up.
Okay. All right. Any last questions or comments? Or Bruce is asking, how do you value the easement, which is kind of a complex question, I think, to answer in 2 minutes or less, Krista. But I mean, checking into Tecumseh Land Trust, they have a wonderful website, and Krista, I'm sure will be, maybe Krista, you could put your email in the chat if, in case people would like to reach out to you. And then Julie and Branson, do you mind sharing your, maybe you'd be willing to share your emails as well, if folks have questions, because I think your story is really inspiring. And I didn't say at the beginning that I actually live on Julie and Branson's farm, and it's an amazingly beautiful farm. And I don't know, it's hard to imagine what it would be like. It could have been all chopped up into smaller, you know, 2-acre house lots, and it's really fabulous to see it held together.
Well, yeah. The important thing, Branson has done a lot to put other conservation practices in place. We're going to have pollinator fields where the hay fields used to be, and he has a prairie system, and we planted another acre of trees, and we have 70 acres of woods, which is all of those plus the water. All of those things are important to protect. And he's done a very good job of increasing protection.
It's a farm with balance. We have ag profits and we have wildlife habitat, we have enjoyment.
And old houses.
And old houses.
Beautiful old houses. Okay, April, did you want to let people know, just to remind them where the watering hole is and how we find links to the next sessions?
I assume the next sessions are in the invitations that people sent out. I don't have access to, well.
Okay, yeah, you can check, if you don't know where you're going, you can check. There was an email that was sent out right at 2 o'clock with links to the next sessions. And they are some of the same resource sessions with farming in a pandemic as a new session. So thank you, Julie and Branson, and thank you, Kevin, for bringing your perspective. And thanks all of you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you around the village or back online.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.